Hello and welcome to the M3 BearCast. My name is Malcolm Travers. Male Media Mind is a grassroots organization dedicated to uplifting and unifying our community through dialogue, insight, creativity, and knowledge. And on the M3 BearCast, I discuss issues that deal with communication, relationships, spiritual ideas, philosophy, and mental health. And I do that as well on my live streams on YouTube. But on this episode, I like to get into details that are not like the conversations that I have online. And so I welcome you to join our conversations. I'm live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And we often take questions from our audience, and it's a great time. But I like to go in depth on the M3 BearCast. And today I'm talking about the new year and my relationship to New Year's celebrations and resolutions. It is ironic that the Male Media Mind blog that I started in 2013 was itself a New Year's resolution. It was a way to get me to write. I had built the blog sometime in October or November towards the end of the year. And when the beginning of the year came around, I tried to convince myself that I could write a new blog post every day. And I was writing with a partner, and we were going to go back and forth writing a new post. And it was a great accelerator for my writing at the time. We were pushing each other to our limits, and we held each other accountable and used the new year as a launching off point. And so from that point forward, I think I've had a different view on the New Year celebration and New Year's resolutions, because in that one regard, it worked for me, and it's still kind of working because it launched a creative endeavor that I'm still engaged in. And so I think why I think it works is that for me, and I think for a lot of other people, we use planning as a way to shelter our fragile egos. We have in our minds this idea that if we plan for it enough, the implementation of it won't fall short of our expectations, of our standards, and that we don't want to try and fail if we haven't given sufficient planning and thought about how to implement it. This is really just one of those coping mechanisms to hide our vulnerability, and it is usually just a way to shelter our fragile egos. And I think a lot of times we know that to be the case when someone points it out. We probably know it on a deeper level, but until we've actually started acting towards our goals, we don't realize that the actions itself is oftentimes the classroom for learning how to do the thing that we want to do. Trying to plan it in your head just by thinking about what it might go this way or that way is a pale imitation of reality. It is never going to actually turn out the way that you think about it in your head. And that could be for the good or the worse, right? It may turn out in some ways to be much better than you had planned. And oftentimes it is much worse than you've planned. And you have to make changes, you have to adapt, and you have to be flexible. And that can only come through action and acceptance of your limitations and holding fast to your beliefs and your values as you are tested by reality, right? Like if you have a difficulty writing a certain passage in the way that you want to write it, the only way that you can find that out is if you actually attempt to write it and it doesn't turn out the way that you want. And when you're faced with the struggle of it not turning out the way that you want, is this something that you want to give up on? Or is it important enough for you to hold fast and actually learn what the problems of that are? And you can't really focus your attention on the problem spots until you've actually run into difficulties in the real world. And so I think that is my case for just going ahead and starting and trying. I will give you an example that I am doing this year, and that is my social media strategy. I have wanted to be a regular content creator for a minute now, but my problem has been this planning as paralyzation. I have these ideas, but instead of getting to a prototype, I just think about it over in my head and think about what I might want to say or do. I've had some ideas in my head that I could have implemented in 30 minutes, but I have been steaming over it for 6 months in my head. Completely ridiculous thing to do. And of course, I'm starting to implement them now that the new year has rolled around. I've decided that I am going to commit to posting regularly. And so I created a schedule that is already wrapped around my regular schedule for content creation. And even when I don't feel like doing it, I set up a time to create content. And it doesn't turn out the way that I want it. It hasn't. However, the fact that it exists in the real world is just motivating me to learn more. Like learning how to do transitions and green screens and getting the little details that I didn't even think to try to plan for came into play. And I'm starting to get better already after just a couple of days. And then there's this idea of accepting my limitations and also accepting the fact that I could have done this a while ago and forgiving myself for having been afraid of trying, because that's part of the process, is getting the courage to face my limitations. And so if that can happen on a New Year's resolution, I'm here for it. I want to encourage you to try to expand your horizons on any projects or endeavors that you have been thinking about doing for a while. Use the new year as an excuse to try it. See it as an experiment. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. Experiments are fun and can show you something that you may not want to do, and you can focus your energy on something else, in your head. It's a lot of things that probably live rent free in your head that, could move out if you if you're not going to try it. You can move on to something else that you may want to fantasize about. So take that into consideration. It can be incredibly difficult to decide what to post online, and I think this has to do with the theory of other minds. How will other people take what you're saying? And I think the most explicit version of this deals with satire. And I was coming into July of last year. I posted a picture of a police officer holding his hand up and saying, "Stop being gay. Pride is over. You can resume being straight now." And obviously, this is satire considering I'm gay. The channel that I'm on talks about LGBT issues, constantly, even though, all of those factors are playing into it. I got people who are genuinely mad at me for posting it. And in fact, on one of the platforms, I want to say it was TikTok, the post was removed for hate speech. I'm like, what the hell? The post was trying to make the point that we don't stop being gay just because Pride Month is over. I get the idea of there being a Pride Month, and, there's been a lot of conversation around the idea that Pride got corporatized, and some people called it rainbow washing different companies, because even though they were out and proud for Pride Month, their actual policies for protecting LGBTQ people in their companies, or using representation in their advertising and media was, sparse to say the least. But then they're out there, selling rainbow t-shirts during Pride Month. I think Target got a lot of that ire, and for good reason. As the Trump administration came into full effect, They folded like a lawn chair when it came to DEI initiatives, so all of it was pretty performative and people could tell. And there was kind of a black backlash against Pride. And so I was kind of playing into that on one of my posts. Another post I did was talking about the Medicaid vote. So I was making the point in this post that Republicans were going to regret voting to cut Medicaid benefits because so many people within MAGA and Republican red states rely on Medicaid for their health care. It affects a lot of people's premiums, whether or not they're even on Medicare or Medicaid. The reason being that the entire system is dependent upon the poorest of those receiving medical care getting their needs met, right? The system of healthcare that we have requires that healthy people pay for sick people. Is a way of distributing the cost because some people's healthcare, by their nature of being sick, is going to be so enormous that they can't afford it. And the idea is to distribute that cost throughout the economy, throughout the healthcare system. And Republicans, I think on an ideological level, don't want to do that, specifically because of the types of people who will be benefiting from that, which are people who are not like them. You can say whatever it is, race, religion, ethnicity, people not like them are going to have to be paid for by them. And for them, that is morally reprehensible. They feel it in their bones to be wrong. And that response, that bigoted response, is being capitalized upon by shrewd right wing politicians, right? There was a meme that I posted about it. It was from Game of Thrones, and it was King Joffrey being poisoned in season 3, if you remember. It looks like in the photo that clutching his pearls, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that conservatives had Medicaid. I had no idea. But in that photo, he's actually just about to die, right? So it's kind of a nuanced meme. I don't know. Nobody got it. I didn't think I was going to be the only one who understood what the meme was about. It's this idea that, Republicans were going to regret their vote against Medicaid. Now, mind you, our political memories are short. And so that's what a lot of people just said in the comments was like, they're not going to regret it. No one's going to remember this a year from now. And you're right. Because I, in the moment, I was just like, they're cutting off their own nose, and yeah, no, not anyone. No one's going to remember that. People's healthcare costs are going up. The Medicaid cuts, the Obamacare subsidies are getting cut. People are going to struggle, and the Democrats are going to tell the Republicans that the Republicans are at fault for this, but they're not going to believe them because it's coming from a Democrat. The Republicans are just going to lie about it, even though it's clearly on the record. And so I think things are just going to continue to go as usual, along ideological lines. The question for me, however, is those of us who are in the know, can we at least get it? Like, I know I'm talking about memes and posting on the internet. Like, people on our side, are we going to get the joke? And I guess maybe in that case, they were right to point out that Republicans aren't going to figure it out. But I don't know. I'm just hoping that people on our side will have a sense of humor about things. So I'm saying this now because I am trying to reestablish a presence on social media in 2026. I want to say that I don't make New Year's resolutions, but I do. M3 was a New Year's resolution back in 2013. So, it kind of stuck, and I can't but help think that sometimes it works. I don't think you have to wait till the New Year's to do that. January 1st is just another day, but it's kind of like because everyone else is doing resolutions on January 1st, it's kind of like why waste an opportunity if it appears? Why not use this momentum that a lot of people are giving you and the solidarity in trying to change something in your life to give you a little bit of boost towards any goals that you happen to have. So for me, I think that's going to be posting on social media on a regular basis, creating content whether or not I post it or not, and my own creative pursuits. I want to dive into those. Specifically, I want to learn more about AI and get more comfortable using some of those tools in my workflow. You know, learning how to dive deeper into my own mind, not necessarily trying to generate content using AI, but to generate questions that I can then answer. I find that sort of prompting myself to, prompting it to prompt me back, asking me deeper questions, putting in work and having it criticize it and point out its flaws, and even, teaching pathways as well. There are, you could ask it to teach you a certain subject and to quiz you on certain ideas and guide you in a certain subject matter to improve your learning capabilities. So that's something that I want to be doing in 2026, learning more, as well as my maintaining my reading and yeah, just doing all the things that I know I should do because there's so many. I don't even really need to name them. Really, it's just using this new year to push me forward. So I am doing that, and I hope you are having a positive pushing yourself forward in 2026. It was sometime around the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001, that I became an atheist. And it was somewhat leading up to that point that I had been reading some free thinking atheist literature here and there, but nothing really stuck for me. I was open to the possibilities of religion. I had had religious experiences, and I enjoyed the theology and the more sane, left leaning Christian fellowship that I received from my church. But what I would have had to recognize in the terrorist attacks on September 11th was the idea that religion, just because it's deeply held, doesn't make it valuable or right. You know, that those 19 terrorists who committed the attacks on 9/11 were deeply held religious people. And something about that disturbed me and woke me up to the idea that just because someone believes something fervently doesn't mean that it's necessarily good. I certainly have some distance now from that time frame where I became sort of a combatant atheist after 9/11, and I posted memes and jokes about religion. The one that I remember getting some heat over was like these two girls sitting in a field, one with a Bible, one with a Quran, and it says, "Hey, my book says you're going to hell. Hey, you too. My book says you're going to hell." and and there was this is a lot of there was a account on Facebook called God, and I think he was a comedian. I don't remember who, but it was a lot of like religious memes that were, to me at the time, hilarious. Pointing out some of the ridiculous beliefs that occur. Now I'm thinking 25 years later, or how many years has it been? What, 20? Yeah, 25 years. I look at those same memes and I laugh, but I don't share them, if that makes sense. I think that the harm that it causes in people's relationships and in their own experience isn't worth the laughs that I get from it, or whatever attention I might get from it. There was recently a TikTok video. of a woman who was honestly trying to explain the reason why an all loving God would sentence you to hell. And it was supposed to be serious, but it was hilarious the way that she it was explaining it. I shared it privately with a few people who I know to be religious, and their response was somewhat dismissive, because what she was saying was theologically accurate to a certain degree. There were certain aspects that were a little, off base, but the major point that she was making was that, God loves you so much that he will burn you up in hell if you don't love him back. I mean, that was the line that circulated on TikTok quite a bit. And people would play the audio as they're pretending to be in Bible study, and they look like side eye, like, why am I here? why am I why am I worshiping a God that would burn me up if I don't love them back? That seems like a abusive relationship. Like some sort of, really bad relationship. But that being said, I have picked up some appreciation for some of the new age philosophy that I read after becoming an atheist. So, one of the things that was really popular after I lost my faith was The Secret. And it still makes me chuckle a little bit. I was introduced to The Secret by a friend, and it was all over Oprah. I think, she was really popular then. And, people were taking manifestation and the law of attraction really, really seriously. Making vision boards. I think I did a vision board at some point, which was actually kind of fun. I'm not going to lie, it was. But, you know, now that seems really silly, especially considering when I saw some of the other products and seminars and things that they were selling based on a really simple idea that was just positive thinking, and mood boards are great and everything, but sort of the magical thinking that went around manifestation and law of attraction even then seemed ridiculous. But now, from with some separation, I realized that I am not so identified with my beliefs anymore. And so I don't feel so fervent in my need to reject an idea like the law of attraction. Like, to me, it's on its face patently absurd that there's some sort of magic involved in, looking at a picture of something that you really want badly and telling yourself that you have it already in the timeline that you're trying to manifest. I do feel like there is a serious benefit in knowing what you value, and when you have choices to make in life, that you make choices that affirm your values. And so making a mood board or, a manifestation journal or something is beneficial in the sense that it influences the decisions that you make. If you want to call that magic, sure, consciousness is magical. It is actually. I mean, the fact that we experience anything as a subjective experience is itself magical. So whatever can change your mind and focus you in the right direction is its own form of sorcery. And that's the way I look at it now. And so when I'm looking at some of this stuff, I did not read The Secret again, but I did read some Deepak Chopra, The Seven Laws of Success, and some of his lectures and things. And I can remember back in the day feeling like he was a huckster, a scam artist, a snake oil salesman, and all of that is still there, right? Like, there is a lot of, trying to make you feel hopeful about certain medical remedies. But one of the things I've noticed now as a much more a mature adult is how much hedging he would use in his language when talking about these research findings, right? He say, is none of this is confirmed. There's things that lead us to believe that, he would hedge a lot. And, and when I was younger, I didn't hear the hedging so much. It's just the hedging sort of went over my head, and I just absorbed what possibilities could exist if these studies were confirmed. But now, as, a more well rounded, read person, I recognize these studies to be what they are, which is, anomalies. Open your mind to the possibility that we don't know all that we know. And I appreciated it, actually. I appreciated the idea that there were people who were looking into different ways of fighting cancer. For instance, he was talking about, you know, a different type of chemotherapy, one where, it was trying to fight the way the cells replicated rather than to kill the cells, which was a less invasive, less toxic, way of dealing with cancer cells, because chemotherapy typically is so toxic that it is sometimes more debilitating than the cancer itself, at least at that time, right? Obviously, if cancer is allowed to metastasize, it would be more deadly than the chemo. But at the time of the administration of the chemo, sometimes it's worse than the current state of the illness. And so finding different ways of treating cancer, actually made a lot of sense, even though I heard this time about how premature it was to say that this was going to be a useful treatment, just a useful way of looking at alternative therapies, right? And so I don't know what I can say I learned from this, which is sometimes we skim over the warning labels at our own risk, and also being open to hearing an alternative idea without absorbing that idea. Just maybe learning what you can learn from their incorrect information, right? Learn what people in the New Age movement are talking about in certain ways without feeling threatened by this information which you believe to be wrong, right? And I think that's what it was when I was younger, is that I was threatened by someone trying to sell me non-factual information. And now I just don't feel threatened by it. And I was able to listen and hear the caveats a lot more clearly. So it was an interesting experience. I don't know if I would recommend it, but it was good for me. Like, maybe the recommendation I can make is, if you thought you have read something when you were in your 20s and you thought it was dumb, maybe in your 40s, reread it. You may be, pleasantly surprised that you have a different perspective on it. And maybe some time has settled and, it's a lot more interesting now, which is what it was for me. So it was cool. And that'll do it for this episode of the M3 BearCast. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to wish you a happy new year. If you want to support Male Media Mind, consider becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/malemediamind. There, for $5 a month, you can become a patron, and you will get access to our Telegram groups. We have a VIP room, we have a book club, we have not safe for work content, and we also have after shows for our live streams. Just for our patrons, you get some inside info about what's going on with M3. And of course, we always appreciate our patrons for their support. It makes so much more possible with a small financial contribution. It allows us to actually, up our game, and we really appreciate your support. Again, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.